The night was quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped itself around the mansion like a velvet curtain, muffling even the faintest sound of the wind. Inside, the house gleamed with wealth. Polished marble floors reflected the dim glow of golden chandeliers, and expensive paintings stared down from ornate walls. But in one forgotten corner of this grand estate, a sight unfolded that would soon change everything for Alexander Whitmore, one of the wealthiest men in the city. Alexander had returned from a grueling day filled with back-to-back business meetings, charity galas, and endless phone calls. His company, Whitmore Enterprises, was on the verge of sealing a billion-dollar merger, and every waking moment had been consumed with contracts, strategy, and negotiations. For a man who had built an empire from nothing, there was little in his life that remained untouched by ambition. Yet, amid the perfection of his sprawling estate, Alexander carried one wound he could never quite heal: his loneliness, made heavier by the loss of his wife 3 years ago. His twins, Daniel and Sophia, were just toddlers when tragedy struck. His wife, Eleanor, had been the heart of the home, warm, nurturing, and the glue that held their little family together. After her death, Alexander threw himself into work, thinking his wealth could somehow fill the void, thinking nannies and caretakers would substitute for the tenderness his children so desperately needed. He loved his children fiercely, but he often loved them from afar, behind boardroom doors, through expensive gifts, or in rushed goodnight kisses before flying off on yet another business trip. That night, however, fate had something in store for him. Alexander entered the mansion quietly, his footsteps echoing in the vast hallway. He loosened his tie, his eyes tired but restless. He told himself he'd check on the twins before retreating to his wing of the house. He climbed the sweeping staircase, expecting to find them in their nursery, tucked into the soft silk sheets of their designer beds. But when he pushed open the door, the room was empty. Confused, he checked their playroom. Empty. He checked the library, silent. His heart began to beat a little faster. For a man who controlled million-dollar deals without flinching, nothing rattled him more than the thought of something happening to his children. And then, as he reached the far end of the servants' quarters, he heard it, the softest sound of breathing, steady and calm. He pushed the door open and froze. There on the cold wooden floor of a small, dimly lit room lay his twins. Daniel's small hand clutched his sister's, and both were curled up like fragile kittens. Beneath them was nothing but a thin quilt, hardly enough to cushion their little bodies. And beside them, her arms stretched protectively over their small frames, lay Naomi, the new maid. Naomi was young, no more than 23. Her skin was deep and rich, her braided hair slightly loosened from a long day's work. She looked exhausted, her uniform wrinkled, her back pressed against the wall as she slept half sitting, half lying, with the children nestled against her. For a long moment, Alexander couldn't move, his breath caught in his chest. The image was both heartbreaking and humbling. The children he thought he was caring for had sought comfort, not in the lavish rooms he provided, not in the endless toys or designer clothes, but in the warmth of a maid who had been in the house only a few months. Why weren't they in their beds? Why were they clinging to her like she was the only safe place they knew? Anger rose in him at first, at the neglect of the other staff, at his own ignorance, at the unfairness of seeing his children sleeping on the floor when they had everything money could buy. But as he took a step closer, that anger dissolved into something heavier. Guilt, crushing, suffocating guilt. He crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead. She stirred but didn't let go of Naomi's arm. Daniel's small chest rose and fell steadily, his tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Naomi's uniform, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. Alexander's throat tightened. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a silent message. A cry his children didn't have the words to speak. They had been missing something that no amount of wealth could provide. And they had found it, somehow, in Naomi. Carefully, he reached out to wake her. "Naomi," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and a little startled. When she saw him, she gasped and immediately tried to rise, careful not to disturb the twins. "Mr. Whitmore." "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling. They didn't want to sleep alone. I tried to put them in their beds, but they cried. They begged me to stay, and I couldn't refuse them. I didn't mean to overstep." Alexander raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-apology. His voice was soft, almost unfamiliar even to himself. "No, you didn't overstep. You did what I should have been doing." Naomi's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected anger, maybe even dismissal. She had taken this job out of desperation. Her mother was sick and hospital bills were piling up. She hadn't expected kindness from her employer, a man known for being strict and distant. Yet here he was kneeling on the floor, his gaze filled not with fury, but with something raw and vulnerable. For the first time in years, Alexander sat down on that cold floor beside his children. He reached for Daniel and Sophia, carefully lifting them into his arms. They stirred but didn't wake, their heads resting against his chest. The warmth of their little bodies against him brought tears to his eyes. Tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in public. Not even at his wife's funeral. He looked at Naomi, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving them what I couldn't." Naomi swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She had grown up knowing what it meant to go without. Without comfort. Without a father's embrace. Without the kind of love money couldn't buy. Perhaps that was why the twins had gravitated toward her so naturally. She had nothing material to give them, but she gave them the only thing she knew, her heart. That night, something inside Alexander shifted. Instead of retreating to his luxurious suite, he carried his twins back to their nursery, with Naomi following quietly behind. He tucked them into bed, but this time, instead of leaving, he sat by their side until they drifted into a deeper sleep. Naomi started to excuse herself, but Alexander stopped her. "Stay," he whispered, gesturing to the chair beside him. And so, in the quiet of that nursery, a millionaire and a maid sat side by side, watching over two children who had unknowingly bridged the distance between worlds. Alexander realized then that money had built him a fortress, but it had also built walls between him and the people who mattered most. His twins didn't need more toys, more tutors, or more wealth. They needed him. They needed family. And Naomi, this young woman who had given them comfort without expectation, was the one who had reminded him of that truth. What Alexander did next would shock everyone who knew him. The man who had once lived only for business made a decision that would ripple through not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. He decided to step down from the ceaseless climb of corporate greed, to bring his work back into balance, to start being the father his children deserved. And Naomi, she would no longer just be the maid. She had become something far more important, the bridge that reconnected a broken family.